repeal and replace defeat.
I believe we must continue to push forward now.
Thank you.
GOP leaders change their strategy as they work toward a new health care law. Pro-life commitment, Senator Luther Strange of Alabama tells me what's next, plus his bill to protect the sanctity of life. Callista Gingrich in the hot seat.
I am profoundly humbled at the prospect of serving my country.
The president's pick for ambassador to the Vatican heads to Capitol Hill. And walking the way of St. James, how EWTN can help you take part in an ancient pilgrimage. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Developing now the future of healthcare. President Donald Trump says it's time to let Obamacare fail after the latest GOP healthcare plan crashes and burns in the Senate. We have team coverage. Mark Irons reports from the White House tonight, and Jason Calvi is at the Capitol. Republicans have vowed for years to do away with Obamacare, but they can't decide how to do it. The latest plan is to do a clean repeal and replace later. Jason Calvi has the latest from Capitol Hill. Good evening, Jason.
Lauren, it's been a crazy day here at the Capitol. I'm just catching my breath, chasing the senators around all day. Republicans met behind closed doors today with Vice President Mike Pence to strategize. Late this afternoon, Republican leader Mitch McConnell, says they're going to go ahead and have a vote sometime soon on a bill to just repeal Obamacare, then working on the replacement of Obamacare at a later time. Here's how he explained it this afternoon.
It's pretty clear that there are not 50 Republicans at the moment to vote for a replacement for Obamacare. Consequently, sometime in the near future, we'll have a vote on repealing Obamacare.
But 3 Republican senators are already saying they're opposed to that option, which means the straight-up repeal would die. Democrats are pointing the finger and telling Republicans to ask for their help.
They can join President Trump in trying to sabotage the system and hurt millions of innocent Americans to try and make a political point that has failed already. Or they can start today working with Democrats.
And we asked Senator Schumer how Democrats can find common ground with Republicans on those controversial health care issues, including abortion and funding of Planned Parenthood. He says they should not work on those issues, but what can unite them. Lauren?
What's next, Jason?
Well, as we said, Leader McConnell says they're going to have a vote sometime soon. We've been speaking to many Republicans, and Senator Marco Rubio says he expects they're going to have this vote sometime this week, probably by Thursday.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. President Trump is deeply disappointed by the collapse of the GOP effort to rewrite the current health care law. The president made his comments to reporters this afternoon as he met with service members. Correspondent Mark Irons continues our coverage from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Trump says he does not blame Majority Leader Mitch McConnell for the decision by Republican senators to come out against the legislation which killed the bill. But the president is blaming Democrats and says he'll wait for them to ask for help.
We'll just let Obamacare fail. We're not going to own it. I'm not going to own it. I can tell you the Republicans are not going to own it. We'll let Obamacare fail, and then the Democrats are going to come to us and they're going to say, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Or how do we come up with a new plan? So we'll see what happens. There's some other things going on.
The president says Democrats are obstructionist. He calls the Senate's health plan a great plan for a lot of people. And Trump says whatever comes after Obamacare has to include less expensive premium options.
I'm sitting in the Oval Office right next door, pen in hand, waiting to sign something, and I'll be waiting, and eventually we're going to get something done, and it's going to be very good. But Obamacare is a big failure.
The president says Republicans need to campaign to win more seats in 2018. There are 34 Senate seats up for re-election. 25 are held by Democrats. So the president is effectively telling his party today, think of those seats. And the president added he wouldn't be surprised if, quote, something were done long before that. That seems to imply that President Trump thinks the Obamacare repeal and replacement could drag out until 2018, Lauren.
Mark, do you believe that the president is going to turn his attention to other priorities, or is health care going to continue to be a laser focus of this administration?
Well, at today's White House press briefing, Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said repealing and replacing Obamacare is very important to President Trump. She was pressed on whether Obamacare is truly dead, as the president has said. Her answer was Obamacare is already going over the cliff, and it doesn't need a push by the president.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. House Republicans unveiled their budget proposal, boosting military spending while cutting Medicare.
In past years, the budget has only been a vision. But now, with the Republican Congress and a Republican White House, this budget is a plan for action.
Representative Diane Black of Tennessee says next year's budget would return power to the states and hold Washington accountable. The proposal includes cuts to food stamps and tax reform. A committee vote could come as early as tomorrow. Callista Gingrich, the president's pick for ambassador to the Vatican, is on Capitol Hill for her confirmation hearing. She highlights the values the U.S. and the Holy See share.
As global leaders, the United States and the Vatican must continue to work closely to advance our shared values of human dignity and freedom. This can only happen if we maintain and build upon a strong foundation of trust and mutual communication.
Gingrich is the former president of Gingrich Productions, the wife of former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. She's a devout Catholic and has been a member of the Basilica of the National Shrine Choir in Washington, D.C. for years. The Trump administration hits Iran with a new round of economic sanctions, but the president is letting the nuclear deal stay in place for now. National security correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with details. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says new sanctions are meant to send a strong signal the U.S. will not tolerate Iran's provocative behavior in the Middle East. 18 individuals and groups in Iran are the target of new sanctions. The U.S. says they support terrorism in the country, contribute to human rights abuses, and back Iran's ballistic missile program.
Iran remains, and we all know this, one of the most dangerous threats to the United States, not only our interests here around the world, but also to regional stability.
A State Department spokesperson says the sanctions will freeze assets in the U.S. and prevent Americans from doing business with them. It comes one day after the Trump administration told Congress for a second time this year Iran is complying with the nuclear deal. In that deal, Iran promised to curb its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. But President Trump says he wants to renegotiate the pact signed by President Obama.
We're analyzing it very, very carefully, and we'll have something to say about it in the not-too-distant future. But Iran has not lived up to the spirit of the agreement, and they have to do that.
On the campaign trail, Trump called the deal disastrous and vowed to dismantle it. Iran's foreign minister hit back during a visit to Washington this week.
Iran, in our view, and in the view of the IAEA, built trust by implementing its side of the bargain. The United States didn't. So it creates the impression in Iran that the United States' hostility towards Iran will never end.
Iranian lawmakers are also responding to the U.S. accusations. They're working on an anti-American bill in response to the sanctions, which condemns the U.S. action in the Middle East as terrorism. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee reporting. Thank you, Wyatt. Rebellion is forcing Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte to ask Congress to extend martial law until the end of the year in the southern third of the country. The request comes following a bloody siege in the city of Marawi by an ISIS-inspired group. The original martial law declaration is set to expire July 22nd, but Duterte says the rebellion won't be finished by then. More than 550 people, including 413 militants, have been killed in nearly 2 months of fighting. Two former executives of the Vatican's Children's Hospital appear in a Vatican court today. They are accused of taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations meant for the hospital Bambino Gesù. Nicole Winfield is Rome bureau chief for the Associated Press and was inside the courtroom today. She joins us from Rome. Welcome to the program, Nicole.
Thank you.
The case involves two former hospital employees. What are the charges and what happened today in court?
Well, the court has charged them with conspiracy and embezzlement. The prosecutors say that they took about nearly €500,000, 422,000 euros, from the hospital foundation and used it to renovate the apartment of Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. He was the former Secretary of State of the Vatican.
Now, he is not charged in the case, but his apartment is involved. Can you tell us how he is connected to the charges?
Well, there was apparently an exchange of letters between the former hospital president, Giuseppe Profitti, and Cardinal Bertone, in which Profitti proposed that the apartment be used for future fundraising events for the hospital. Bertone, who has always been a supporter of the hospital, made himself available and thought that was a great idea. He, though, wanted that the apartment be renovated not at the expense of the foundation, but by someone else. It turns out, though, that the foundation ended up paying for the renovations upwards of 422,000 euros.
What is the impact that this investigation is having at the Vatican and elsewhere?
Well, it certainly doesn't look good. You never want to have a cardinal seemingly profiting off of donations that were intended for sick children. That's the optics that this is coming under. Cardinal Bertone says he knew nothing about this payment. The former hospital president says that this was purely an investment, that he intended to recover this money because he intended to have these fundraising events at the apartment that would have more than made up for the money that he put into the renovations.
In addition to this, you were part of a major investigation by the Associated Press that uncovered very serious problems at the hospital itself. What did you find?
Well, it turns out that in 2014, the Vatican itself commissioned an investigation into the hospital because staff were complaining that corners were being cut, that safety protocols were being ignored, because there was a real push to turn the hospital around financially, and the staff were very concerned. So there was a report that Cardinal Parolin commissioned, and it found that the mission of the hospital had indeed been lost in the last few years and was more aimed at profit than on childcare. So we investigated that, we corroborated it, and then we also discovered that there was a second in-house investigation by the Vatican that found absolutely the opposite, that found that the hospital was in many ways best in class. The interesting thing is that neither of those reports were ever shared with Italian public health authorities who pay most of the hospital's bills, because while it is a hospital of the Vatican, it operates within the Italian public health system.
Nicole Winfield, Associated Press Rome bureau chief, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, Senator Luther Strange of Alabama tells me what's next in the repeal of Obamacare.
We're at Plan B now.
Plus, his commitment to protecting life. And the royals visit Poland as part of a goodwill tour. My next guest has been in high-level meetings to talk about the future of replacing and repealing Obamacare and the impact on the pro-life movement. Joining us now is Luther Strange, Republican Senator of Alabama and a native of Birmingham who helped EWTN fight the HHS mandate requiring employers to provide contraception. Thank you, Senator, for joining us.
Glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Have you spoken with Leader McConnell since the fallout of the health care bill vote, and what's next?
Well, I did have a chance to have breakfast with him this morning, and the next step is to vote on the bill that's been voted on in the past, as you know, repeal and replace, allowing time for a 2-year transition period to find answers to the problems created by Obamacare, but repeal it right away with this time gap. So I think that's what we're headed for. We'll learn more later as this unfolds, but we're at Plan B now.
Are you confident, Senator, that pro-life measures will be protected, particularly defunding Planned Parenthood and protecting the Hyde Amendment, preventing federal money from being used to perform abortions?
I am. I'm certainly not supporting anything that doesn't take into account everything you just mentioned. In fact, I even voted against the last omnibus spending bill when we were unable to get the funding for Planned Parenthood taken out. So that's at the top of my agenda, and we have a very strong values coalition that will make that a top priority.
You've introduced a bill, the Sanctity of Human Life Act, declaring that life begins at fertilization. What is your goal with this bill?
Well, this bill is very near and dear to me. It's another important step in the pro-life movement. It allows, extends protection 44 years after Roe v. Wade to the unborn by defining life beginning at fertilization. The goal is to provide some constitutional protections under the 14th Amendment and ultimately allow the states under the statute to do their own laws that would move protection in that direction.
What kind of support are you getting from your colleagues on this?
I'm getting great support from our pro-life team, and now our challenge is to spread the word and expand our coalition. But I'm very encouraged by the support I've received, very encouraged.
You've been defending life long before you came to the Senate. Tell us about other legislation you're working on to defend life.
Well, I love being Attorney General and having the opportunity to sue the HHS on the contraception mandate, other issues, of course, protection of women's health issues. That was fun. Now in the Senate, I get to propose things that are positive, so conscience protection, physicians who have a moral objection to performing abortions, very critically important piece of legislation. I'm very happy about that. Of course, the other protocols internationally where we stop the funding of abortions internationally, that's another priority of mine. So there are a number of things going on. And I would say the last thing that I'm very proud of is confirming conservative judges who believe in the rule of law and have a pro-life stance. Because, as you well know, a lot of these decisions will be decided in our federal courts, and I want to make sure we have people who understand the law and the importance of life.
Absolutely. Senator Luther Strange of Alabama, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Britain's Prince William and his wife Kate visit a World War II Nazi concentration camp in Poland. The royal visit to the Stutthof death camp comes on the second day of a trip aimed at underscoring the United Kingdom's good relations with the European Union after it leaves the bloc. William and Kate will head to Berlin, Germany tomorrow. Up next, the Vice President's message to the people of Israel. And working in the White House, we'll talk to former White House Press Secretary Mike McCurry to get his take on communication in the era of Trump. Renewed support for Israel from Vice President Mike Pence. He spoke at the Christians United for Israel Summit in Washington last night.
This president hears you. This president stands with you. And I promise you that the day will come when President Donald Trump moves the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It is not a question of if, it is only when.
The Vice President told the group he is passionate about this and the subject of his Christian faith. Our next guest cites faith as the reason we need kinder and gentler political discourse. On-camera press briefings at the White House have been pretty hit and miss recently, and that has the White House Correspondents Associated frustrated, and the journalists believe Americans should be able to watch and listen to government officials as they face questions. Unofficial record keeper Mark Knoller of CBS Radio says that since June 1st, there have been 7 on-camera briefings, 20 off-camera briefings, and 3 days without a briefing at all. Joining us now, someone who knows something about briefings, Mike McCurry, former White House press secretary to Bill Clinton and professor of public theology at Wesley Theological Seminary. Welcome to the program.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
Thank you so much for your time. You and Ari Fleischer, former press secretary for George W. Bush, co-wrote Advice to the Media in the Columbia Journalism Review. And one of the things that you said was that you think that press briefings should remain, but it should not be televised. As somebody who sat in that briefing room when there were televised briefings and loved them, I don't know what you're saying. Why would you want that?
That's not saying not televised, saying not live televised.
So delay.
If the live television makes it into a show, and then everyone has to perform.
Grandstanding.
Both sides, the press secretary and the reporters. But it's a briefing, and it's supposed to be a way in which you gather information, and you need to go check it against other sources. I would argue probably Ari would not argue, but I would argue in this administration, you need to check what you hear against other sources and then report. And then we get a report that kind of brings together all that the journalist brings to the picture, but it's not the entire story, and it's not a news event in and of itself. So that's what we're after there.
Well, I understand that because you get people who want to keep asking the same question over and over again to get that going back and forth, the tension going back and forth.
Sometimes the TV correspondents from different networks all ask the same question so they can be on camera
asking the question. Right.
And what is that about?
What is that? What else do you think should change?
I think we need a lot more truth, content, factual information about what the president, the White House is really doing. That's what this briefing should be about. It ought to be about the content of what the government does. Back in the day when I was press secretary a long time ago, my daughter likes to say, "Dad, that was like the last century."
Yeah, right. Like, oh, so old, Dad.
That's right. But at that time, we had a lot of the agencies of government had their own briefings, and that's, gone away now. And the American people suffer because they don't learn more about what's going on in government. So much of it funnels through the White House. So the White House press secretary and the White House communications apparatus has to be able to talk about a lot of different things happening in our government, and it ought to be much more focused on that content and on just the basic things that the American people need to know about what is their government doing, not the spin, not the theater of politics.
I have a hard time.
Although I'm pretty good.
I was just going to say, you were pretty good at spin. This is a little bit, of a hindsight 2020.
You will appreciate that's now called the doctrine of atonement. So I am like atoning for my previous sins.
Speaking of faith, what role do you think that faith should have in this instance in politics and in communication between the White House and the press, if any?
Well, faithful people. I happen to be a practicing Methodist, but I have deep appreciation for the Catholic tradition of social and economic justice and how matters of faith inform how we work together and bring common good to a community. And we need more of that. Sometimes religion has been used as a political weapon in our politics. And what I would like to see is faith informing the way in which we bring people together and try to resolve our differences and actually change the tone of our politics. It's very bitter, very polarized. I think everybody in America would agree with that.
Do you think since the 90s, since you were in there to now, that it's worse?
Yeah, it's gotten worse, and it probably got worse while I was there, and I probably contributed myself to making it worse by being a little too much of a spin doctor sometimes.
Do you regret that?
Oh, I very much do.
Why?
Very much do. Because I think I probably contributed through the whole televised briefing. The briefings were not televised until I got there. And once they became kind of this televised spectacle every day, people began to posture and they began to act out roles rather than genuinely, authentically thinking about how do we bring people together and do something that will help the country understand what's going on. Most people just say, just tell me what the facts are.
Right, and stop the blather and
stop the spin. And so I contributed.
That's your next book, by the way, Stop the Spin.
Yeah. Actually, a guy from the Washington Post wrote a book mostly about me. I've never written a book because he can more or less write it for me, called The Spin Cycle. And I look back and I said, well, that's not what I want to be known for. I want to be known to kind of bring people together and do different things together.
Good. It was a pleasure talking to you,
Mike
McCurry. Thank you so much. Former White House press secretary to President Bill Clinton.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, EWTN crews are on a 65-mile journey from Portugal to the tomb of St. James the Apostle in Spain. It's part of a Camino, or walk, following in the footsteps of medieval Christians.
Are you looking forward to the challenge? Are you nervous about it? Because it won't be easy, especially in the heat.
Well, you know what they say, it takes a man to be a priest. So I'm up for the challenge. We wear black habits for a purpose, and that's because we've laid our life down on the altar.
This is day 2 of their 9-day trip. You can follow along the way of St. James in a group on EWTN's Facebook page. If you don't have access, we're filming the entire pilgrimage, and we will air it later on EWTN. That does it for us. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night, and God bless you.